Hello everybody, my name's Tom and we're back for another F1 Fantasy Weekend Bonanza. We've had FP1, we've had FP2, it's time to have a think about what we want to do. And that was not an intentional rhyme, I swear to God that came out of my head as and when it came out of my head. There we go, so no preparation there, it's a rhyme, I'm a poet, I didn't know it. Anyway, we're going to go into my discussions for team selection for Spa this weekend in a moment, where I'll be looking through the FP1, FP2 times, which I've stuck up on screen. We'll have a look at what the F1 official websites put in terms of qualifying pace, race pace, etc. I'll be thinking about what that means for our teams and what I'm thinking for my team going forward, etc., etc., etc. Same old for final final thoughts. I will be doing my stream tomorrow as well, by the way, Saturday, 1 hour ahead of qualifying, 2 p.m. UK time. That is 1 hour before qualifying. So if you're free on Saturday, to come join in some fun. Otherwise, I'll just chat to myself and just pretend that people are listening. But no, please do come join in the chat. It's good to share thoughts and team selections and things, and I can answer some questions if you want. And then I'll lock in my team live on screen. So yeah, come join. But just before all this craziness happens, and I discuss my buzzing thoughts for Spa this weekend, I do want to kind of throw something out to the F1 fantasy community. And what I've been thinking, I've had an idea, and I'm going to throw it out there. So my idea is to potentially have, if people are interested, other content creators, whether that be YouTube, Twitter, or whatever, as long as you're like some sort of content creator for some F1 fantasy content somehow, then I would be interested in having you on my channel, potentially. If you want to do that, if the viewers, you guys who are not content creators, but just kind of like absorbing content creation, if you're interested in me potentially interviewing some other content creators if they're interested as well, just discussing general thoughts and feelings about F1 fantasy, and I can ask some general questions on that. I think it might be quite fun, just have a bit of an informal discussion, nothing too scary. I don't want to scare people off. I'm just a normal regular person that just wants to have a chat basically. And if people were interested in that, if people are interested in participating, if you're a content creator, then reach out to me in the comments or on Twitter or whatever. And if you're a viewer and you'd be interested in seeing that, maybe getting to know the other content creators a bit better, maybe I can extract some information from them. So if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. And like I say, just going to throw it out there. And the idea actually came, I would like to say thank you to Adam from F1 Fantasy HQ. If you don't know his website already, really good website. He occasionally posts some interviews and stuff. And I read one just yesterday or day before, whenever it was, that he posted onto Twitter, and I just found the interviews really interesting. Like, he interviews other fantasy managers, which is effectively what I would be doing on my channel, and I find it really interesting to get into the head of another fantasy manager. So I just kind of think it might be quite cool to do. So what do you think? Anyway, that's that, and I'm going to get into my actual team selection thoughts for Spa, because we've had FP1, like I say, we've had FP2. FP1, FP2 are on screen, as you can see, as is the qualifying simulation pace, which we're going to start off with. As always, it seems the Red Bulls are kind of on top, but this weekend is a bit different because Max Verstappen has got this grid penalty. It's going to be 10 places, which means the best he can start is 11th, even though I'm pretty sure somewhere down here it does say he can start 10th. Yeah, best he can start from is 10th, but surely if he's first and he goes back 10 places, that puts him 11th. I don't know. Maths is really hard. Anyway, Max Verstappen won't be starting in the top 10. Perez is like way off the pace in terms of qualifying pace. He wasn't there on the soft. He's like almost a second off or something from Verstappen. Race pace as well. He's off the margin. So I think Red Bull are just not looking as strong as they might normally do, and I think that opens the door widely for McLaren, who have already kind of pushed their way through into our fantasy teams quite excessively over the last few weeks anyway. But I do think that we're going to see a lot of orange in our teams this week as well, because I think not only going to qualify ahead of everyone else, they're probably going to hold that position in terms of race pace. As we jump ahead here, you see the race pace is slightly off the Red Bulls apparently, although from what I've seen on Twitter from various accounts, the McLarens, in particular Piastri, was actually really, really on it and actually fractionally faster than the Red Bulls, so it's kind of interesting. But I know the F1 website, like fuel correct and engine mode correct and all this sort of stuff as much as they can. So I'm not sure exactly how accurate this is necessarily, but in terms of McLarens, I think McLarens are still great assets this week. The Ferraris, interestingly, they look pretty good when I was watching F1 and FP2. And they are actually edging the Mercedes this week in terms of race pace. Only just, and again, this isn't like an exact science. Mercedes may well edge ahead again, and there'll be further changes for FP3, and then further changes before qualifying. So these aren't like locked in by any stretch of the imagination. But it's interesting at this point the Ferraris do look actually quite decent. In fact, they're quicker in both qualifying and race pace than the Mercedes. That's interesting. I think a lot of us will have Mercedes over Ferrari currently in our team, and I don't think it's worth it unless you've got luxury transfers to actually then move into Ferrari. I think I'd still be very happy to stick with the Mercedes and concentrate more on getting the right McLaren assets, or indeed all the McLaren assets, and focusing also on your C-tier assets where there could be some potential price gains this week. Some 0.5 rises with lots of overtakes and things, and that's something I was thinking about as well. I'll just get it out there whilst it's in my head. The fact that the C-tier assets are going to potentially do well this week with lots of overtakes, and they're going to get their 0.5 rises, does that, I was thinking, I feel like it does it make the B-tier assets actually slightly less desirable this week, because it's going to make it harder for them to get above the, whatever it is, 3.1 times the average score, the average points haul for driver on the grid. So I'm thinking actually it might be a bit more tricky for those B-tier drivers to get like a million rise. I think like the likes of Piastri would literally have to win the race. He might get it if he comes second, if he also picks up like fastest lap or something, or driver of the day or whatever. But I do think that it's got potential for making it a bit more difficult for those A and particularly B-tier assets to grow much in terms of budget, unless they have an exceptional weekend. But then we are talking about McLaren and Piastri, who's just on the back of his first Grand Prix victory and looking very smooth and solid there through the practice sessions. And I think Piastri looks like a good shout. So that's the top end of the thing. The bottom end of the things is a bit more iffy. I mean, we're used to seeing the Saubers down here, but the RBs are, qualifying poor, which is good for fantasy, but then race pace is also shocking. And watching FP1, FP2, they were pretty bad. Like they had like occasional good sectors, mainly through sector 1 or maybe sector 3, but that middle sector was awful. And that's where you're going to lose most of your time, going through the slower and medium corners. There's a lot of corners in that middle sector, and there's only basically one corner and like 3 or 4 corners, whatever it is, in the final sector. So you're going to lose a lot of time in that middle sector, and the RBs were losing a chunk of time. When I was watching them in FP2, I think they were losing like a second to a second and a half. Well, it actually says a second and a half down here, but when I was actually watching it, it was more or less all that time is pretty much lost in the middle sector, which is a bit worrying. So that, but we do have Tsunoda starting at the back of the grid, so that's also kind of appealing in that regard as well. Everyone else is kind of where you'd more or less expect them, I guess. I guess the Alpine's a little bit higher than what we'd imagine. And that's kind of reflecting a little bit what I've seen on Twitter as well, with other people predicting the Alpine's race pace actually isn't that bad. Trouble is the Alpine's is so unreliable at the moment. Gasly's back-to-back DNFing. Ocon had a water leak issue in FP1, which meant he did like nothing. In fact, what did he do? He did pretty well though in FP2, P7 I can see there. Yeah, P7 is not bad actually, but either way, let's move on to, should we throw it onto my actual team and have a look at some combinations. So I think this team that I've got on screen at the moment probably reflects quite largely what a lot of you have got as well. I'd imagine there'll be some outliers where people will have random stuff like, well, not quite random stuff, but alternative things like Red Bull Constructor. There might be a couple of people that have dipped into the Haas Constructor as an enabler to get some bunch of B tier assets and that and grow their budget, which I think is perfectly reasonable. And that could also actually be a reasonable thing to do this week if the Haas are that strong. And we throw it back here just very briefly. The Haas race pace is only marginally, but it is the best according to the best of the rest after the top 4, so to speak. So they are the 5th best team, qualifying 6th best, so it does bode quite well for Hulkenberg and Magnussen in terms of an overtaking track as well. So we could see some people more kind of revert to this Haas build that enables you 13.5 million to upgrade someone or other. I wish I could, like, if I had the budget to upgrade Joe to another like B tier driver, but I can't because Russell's the cheapest one. I can't quite get there. But maybe you want to like drop in Norris, and then you could bring in Piastri and then like a Ferrari asset or something, and just try and get all in on that budget, which I think is important. I do think budget is important. I personally won't be going for a team like this. It's too many transfers, it's too many like -10s and things. But I think if you've got a team structure that enables you to move fairly freely into something like this, then I do think that it's a perfectly reasonable possibility to do this. It's potentially incredible for budget gain. But I think it's a little, maybe a little bit risky, but I think it's fine. I think it's also kind of fine. I don't know, I kind of like it, but I personally will probably be playing a little bit more safe. So what I'm thinking currently, I'm still kind of a little bit considering just leaving it as it is, but I also kind of want to improve my C tier drivers. Sargent's done okay recently, but he's still dropping value. Zhou's just really not impressed, and he's consistently like P19, P20, qualifying and race, just going nowhere, dropping value. I am still very interested in gaining value, and I think that potentially dropping to a Piastri, dropping out Norris, and dropping back into this better C tier asset down here. It's a tough one. I think Tsunoda is definitely, I've kind of slagged off to some extent the RBs earlier on in the week, but it changes everything now that they have. Now that Tsunoda specifically has this penalty, which is guaranteed to start him at the back of the grid. I think he becomes a lot more appealing, even though the RB's race pace is bad. It means he can't, unless he DNFs, he can't lose any points for positions lost. Like, it's guaranteed. The only way you can do that is basically DNF him. So he's only really got positions gained to make, which is fantastic. And then overtaken, I think he was eighth overtaken so far this season, if I remember correctly, something like that, which is fine as a C tier asset. And there are lots of opportunities to overtake. And I think the RB has shown some decent straight line speed, so that's good opportunity for overtaking. I just wonder if they're going to struggle too much for that middle sector, potentially chew up their tyres and have that poor race pace that the simulation is kind of indicating at the moment. But we can overthink things a little bit. I think that's potentially overthinking it, and I think the fact that Tsunoda is a C tier asset that's fairly affordable for most people, and he's guaranteed to start at the back, it's just kind of a bit too much like looking a gift horse in the mouth if you don't take it. I think it's kind of there, and I think it sets up for me personally quite well to go with a team like this, and this is kind of my strongest feelings at the moment, is to go into a team like this. It does obviously neglect Lando Norris other than in covering him in the constructor points, and that's a bit painful, but I think the way Oscar Piastri is driving at the moment, and the fact that he's a B tier asset under 25 million, capable of gaining more price, even though it's potentially a bit more difficult around this track, I think Piastri is just driving incredibly well. I'm extremely confident with him in my team. He's just got general great pace. He seems so calm, composed, mature. I really, really like Oscar Piastri. He's on the back of that win. We could very easily see back-to-back wins here. I don't know how often that's happened in the past in F1 history. I'm sure there's someone out there will know, but like after your debut win, following up with another win, I don't know. I'm sure that Piastri is capable of doing something like that, and as fast as Lando Norris is, I think Piastri is right about there on par, if not potentially even faster in some cases. I will say one thing about Piastri the last couple of weeks is he keeps just dipping his tyre into the gravel, and that is one thing that does concern me. He did it once or twice at Hungary. He's done it once or twice through the practice sessions as well. If you haven't seen the practice sessions, or I don't know if it showed up in the highlights, but Piastri has dipped a wheel once or twice in the gravel around Spa, around Spa-Francorchamps. So I do think that Piastri is like, I don't know, it does just worries me a little bit if he does that in the race and spins off into the gravel, beaches it, and then he's your 2 times driver and you've got a DNF. That would be worst case, because he hasn't actually DNF'd this season. I think, is he like the only driver that hasn't DNF'd? I don't know. But he's I don't know, the laws of like probability and everything indicate he's going to DNF eventually, and that's another thing that does concern me, but I don't think that should really enter my thoughts too much. The fact is that he is a very good asset. He is underpriced compared to like Lando Norris. He's like 3 million cheaper. He's going to get that potential price gain. I'm really, really kind of not settled at all by any stretch of the imagination on this team. But when I've been like going over it in my head since the practice sessions and even like earlier on in the week, I'm very much happy. I've been fiddling about in and out of the different C-tier drivers, but I think Tsunoda starting at P20 is too good to turn down. So I think a team like this, for me personally, looks good. One other thing I will say about Tsunoda, which does, again, also slightly concern me. I always have these slight concerns. Nothing's easy in fantasy. One thing that does concern me is the potential that Tsunoda doesn't actually set a qualifying lap. I don't think that's very likely, but it's possible because he knows he's starting P20, and if it's going to rain during qualifying, which it looks like it will, then maybe they won't risk putting the car out on the track in wet conditions, and therefore Tsunoda will start the weekend with a -5, which would be pretty crippling and disastrous. I don't think they're going to do that. I think he will go out most likely, even if it's like potentially as a tow for Ricciardo, but they've got to be careful with the tow if it is wet, because then they're always going to do is end up spraying loads of spray up into Ricciardo's face. I'm not even sure that's going to work either. But yeah, that is something that's in the back of my mind. It's always in the back of my mind when these guys get these guaranteed back of the grid starts and everything. But I think it should be okay. As long as he sets a lap, we should be right. He might just go out in like Q1 just for some practice or something. I don't know, but I'm hoping it'll be all right. Fingers crossed. Okay, so I've talked quite a lot about what I'm thinking right now, and you might be thinking like, whoa, slow down. You haven't spoken about Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen does deserve a bit of a chit chat about, because the Red Bulls clearly, as we've seen over here, race pace simulation, according to this, is very, very strong. Qualifying, where are we? Qualifying pace, also very strong. So he's likely to get like pole, second or third, and then move back to 11, 12, 13. For me personally, though, I'm just not that interested in Max Verstappen for a couple of reasons. One, it's only a 10 place grid penalty, which means he's far back from. He has, in my opinion, very little chance of winning the race. I think he's got a good chance of getting back to P5, maybe even P4, but I think podium's potentially pushing it. I don't know. He's got potential for sure. But I think with how competitive the cars are up at the front, particularly the McLarens, I think he's got very little chance of winning the race. I think the McLarens are just too strong, and him coming back from, P11, 12, 13 or whatever is just a bit of a concern for me if I was going to go for him. Also, starting back in 11, 12, 13 is in what I call the meat grinder, particularly going into turn 1 around Spa. It's a recipe for people just bashing into each other. And the way Max Verstappen's been driving recently, there's a lot of bashing into other people. I'm not saying he's at fault. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of racing incidents or anything like that. But I do think Max Verstappen, in that meat grinder, he'll be desperate to get forward. He'll also be kind of sensible, I think. He is sensible. He's not going to necessarily rush in there. But the way he's driving does make me think like, well, maybe he's just going to be a little bit anxious to try and jump a couple of spots off the get-go. Because he'll be anxious to try and catch up to the McLarens, or maybe he's just going to kind of give up, accept that the McLarens are going to win this weekend, and he'll settle for to get as close to the podium or on the podium if he can make it, and just play the long game. There's a lot of laps around here, like 50 odd laps or whatever it is. Is it 50 odd laps? I don't know, but it's a long old race, as we know. Plenty of opportunity to overtake. So I think Max Verstappen might just bide his time, but nevertheless, I think he might struggle to get forward. He's going to guarantee himself more or less like a few overtakes and at least like 5 or 6 positions gained or whatever it is. But for 31.1 million, you need more than that. I don't think he's that likely to get driver of the day unless he literally does come through and win the race. Then he might get it, but even then, he seems a little bit immune to the driver of the day vote. So I don't know. Probably end up with a Ferrari or more likely McLaren driver, Lando Norris. But yeah, I do think that if Max Verstappen was starting at the very back of the grid, he'd be a lot more appealing for me personally. And I know lots of people will be saying, no, he's still good. He's still a good option. He is a good option. But he's 31.1 million and it does warp the team. Unless you've got a big budget, I think it's not ideal for me. And I mean, if I was going to put him in, let's shove him in. I'd have to get rid of my other B tier asset, most likely. And I don't have enough swaps and things to do that, so you could go over a team like this. This would for me be a minus 10 to get to this, and then you could potentially change Sargent to Sauber. That seems like a waste of time though, unless you're going to wildcard. But even then, I actually think Sargent might actually just be better than a Sauber driver at this stage. I don't think Sargent is necessarily the worst driver on the grid for fantasy. I think these Saubers are fast becoming the worst cars on the grid for fantasy. I don't know. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. Sargent will get his customary DNF at some point, but if I was going to go over Verstappen build, I would choose the Verstappen driver asset over a Red Bull constructor asset. I have looked at the Red Bull constructor asset. It does look quite nice. But then you think Perez is just not driving well. He's not on the pace again. He's been complaining a little bit. Yes, he may come good on Sunday, but I just don't have any real faith in Red Bull as constructor. And going forward to Zandvoort and beyond after the summer break, I think these are the two constructors I most likely want to build around. I want those cheaper, more valuable, higher value, get the value packed into my constructors more than I want to spend money on Red Bulls. So I think if I was going to go Verstappen, I'd do the driver asset and probably try and improve my C tier assets and try and get some price gains there and maximise Max's points. But yeah, I think going forward, I probably don't really want too much Red Bull coverage. It's just too expensive in my team. We got Zandvoort after the summer break, where there's not going to be too many overtakes historically. I mean, last year was a bit of an exception because it was a wet race and it was all a bit mental. But historically, it's not a very easy track to overtake around Zandvoort. So having all these C tier assets that are, again, not going to score many points most likely, just be stuck in DRS trains around Zandvoort. But it probably means these guys are going to lose value or find it hard to increase their value. And then you're stuck with Max Verstappen and a bunch of rubbish C tiers. And I think going forward, I want to be a bit more secure with my team. And going forward, I think my team looks a bit more McLaren/Mercedes oriented. So yeah, kind of overall, for me personally, I'm unlikely to go over Verstappen. We'll see what happens in FP3, although FP3 is probably just going to be a wet mess and we won't know much of anything. At the moment, as it stands, for me personally, I might think about it more. I might see something, and maybe another content creator or someone on Twitter is going to post something and be like, oh, wow, actually, I didn't think of that. And maybe someone in the comments right now will say, like, oh, but Tom, what about? But for me personally, right now, as of the time of recording, Max Verstappen's a no. Okay, so let's move it back, let's switch it back to my original team. And to kind of summarise my thoughts so far is Mercedes. Actually, I haven't spoken about Mercedes before I get to the summary, but I should mention Mercedes because I think they do play a big part in our teams at the moment. A lot of us will be sat with Mercedes asset, and I was really hoping that Mercedes would look great, just so I could be like, Hamilton's in, then Tsunoda or maybe Magnussen, because I could just about afford Magnussen as well for zero money in the bank. This is what I was looking at earlier before the practice sessions. I think if Mercedes are on top form here with their new upgrade, I could go for a team like this, but I don't think Mercedes have looked particularly strong. They're quite far off the pace. The race pace was like a good half a second or more back on the McLarens and Red Bulls, so I don't think I can really go in this hard. If the Mercedes look great, this would be so good because it'd be so good for building budget. Like the budget potential of this team looks phenomenal, but I think in general, I'm going to kind of avoid them. Let's just shove it back. In fact, let's just redo that. So yeah, my thoughts on Mercedes are they're still fine kind of holds if there's no other real moves that you want to do. Like I say, I'm tempted to do this move where I bring in Piastri and most likely Tsunoda and keep hold of two Mercedes assets here. They're not particularly exciting this weekend. They're still quite far off the pace, but I'm not just going to throw out -10s just to bring in like a Ferrari, because I don't think I can even get to a Ferrari with this build either, can I? Me personally, no. I'm still like good $500,000 or so off that. So I think George Russell, the cheapest of these big B tier drivers here, is still fine. I'm not going to try and pile in too much on Mercedes, and in fact I have even considered just dropping them almost entirely apart from the constructor to kind of go in on the McLarens, but that would enable me, that would also require me to put Guan Yu Zhou back in there. That would mean I have to get Valtteri Bottas. So I could go over a team like this. I could just completely abandon Mercedes apart from the constructor. I don't think Mercedes are that bad. They're still fine to hold. Obviously, the upside of this is you get the triple McLaren build. For me personally, stuck with the three worst C tiers, were on a track where the C tiers are likely or hopefully going to get some good budget gains. I just can't see any of these guys getting that 0.5 rise necessarily. I can't see any of them really getting like many overtakes or positions gained. I mean, Zhou's likely to start P18, P19 or whatever. Bottas is probably going to qualify P12, P13 or whatever. It's wet. Things could change around, of course. But I just can't see any of them gaining too much value. This obviously could be a fantastic team, though, however, if you just focus purely on the McLaren side of it. And going forward, maybe in Zandvoort and beyond, McLaren should do well around Zandvoort, high downforce track, etc. Maybe around Zandvoort we want the triple McLaren build, so maybe just going with this, just forgetting about the C tiers entirely this weekend is actually a good way to go about it. I don't know. I kind of like the Tsunoda pick and kind of edging my bets with Piastri, Russell, but maybe this is just better. Maybe just going in on the McLarens. And of course, if you are more have more budget than me, then you can afford someone like a Tsunoda, Hulkenberg, or Magnussen in amongst this. Then I think it might actually just be better than splitting the difference with two B tier drivers like a Piastri and a Russell. But I'm not sold on this triple rubbish C tier asset side of things. Not sold on it, but it does look pretty good having the three kind of best assets in the game right now. I don't know what your thoughts and feelings are on that. Are you kind of more edging your bets with a mixture of like Mercedes, like Russell or Hamilton and a Piastri, plus some improved C tier assets, or are you just going to kind of keep trying to hoard those points? Hope there's a strong likelihood that one of the McLarens will get driver of the day, and if you go with a team like this, then you're kind of covering both bases. Piastri and Lando, if they get driver of the day, you're kind of covered. If Lando gets it, great, because he's a 2 times most likely. Yeah, I do kind of like this build quite a bit, but it's pulled back by these rubbish C tiers. But I am still tempted by it. I don't know. It's still a little bit up in the air. I've still got like a whole night to sleep on this, and got FP3, and then I'll be streaming. Going into the deadline as well, so I'll be tearing my hair out, no doubt, and stressing and sweating as to what I'm actually going to do tomorrow at 2 p.m. So yeah, I think that kind of, I guess, summarizes my thoughts more or less. I'm definitely edging more towards this kind of McLaren-y Mercedes build, as opposed to a Verstappen, walk my team, faff around with Verstappen and hope for the best sort of thing. But I'm still very much undecided because I need to think about it more. Basically, I need to think about it more. And I want to see the F1 Fantasy Tool simulations, of course. I want to see a bit more stuff come out in terms of like the F1 website, in terms of like what the team said. I don't know if they've got that out already. Oh yeah, they have. Look at that. What the team said. They've just published it. Oh, an hour ago. I've been talking for too long. So I'm gonna have a read through this as soon as I've come off recording this. I'm going to read through this and see exactly what everyone said, and then we'll reevaluate in the morning, and I'll hopefully see as many of you as possible for the stream. This feels like a long old chat this evening, but I'm kind of excited and pumped. So yeah, let me know thoughts and feelings about your team. Let me know thoughts and feelings about what I suggested earlier in terms of interviewing other content creators, and if you're interested as a content creator, let's go. Let's do it. Let's build this community. Let's connect. Let's improve as much as we can. Let's just take off as a community. Take off. Here we go. Have a lovely Friday night, everybody, and I'll see you for the stream, hopefully. Ciao.